06010.
The Fantasy Focus Football Podcast is presented by Geico. Hello and welcome in. Thursday, Week 2 games begin tonight with the Browns and the Bengals. We'll discuss that. Field Yates and Mike Clay. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm excited. I mean, I know it's like Browns, Bengals, and you might think it's just, two lower end teams, but it's football, Field. It's football.
And it also is a very exciting night for Joe Burrow, making his first national television appearance. Baker Mayfield and the Browns have a lot at stake. Daniel Dopp is here with us. And of course, Stephania Bell is also here in her new domain, which is about, 15 feet away from us, just separated by a wall. Hello, Stephania.
Hello.
How are
I can see you guys on this very big screen. I love it. When I was at home, I couldn't see you, so I just had to imagine what you look like.
Is this an upgrade?
Oh, yeah. Living color.
You would prefer to see us.
I prefer to see.
This is one of the first times I've been told that in my life.
Is that just because Matthew's not on this show, or is it a different reason?
I will refrain from commenting.
Yeah, smart. Sometimes silence is your best method. Just a reminder, one more time, that you've heard this on the show the past couple of days. But we want to spend one more minute to just remind you that we were so excited to hit the road for our 5th straight season of live shows. And we've been all over the map. Boston, New York, Philadelphia. We've been to Houston. We've been to Chicago. We've been to Detroit, which was great. We've been to Los Angeles. We have been from one coast to the other, D.C. and other cities also in there as well. We're going to do that again eventually. But in the meantime, in the interest of everyone's safety, we're going to hit the road to your living room. Instead, we'll basically have a virtual live event, which is coming to you next Tuesday, September 22nd at 6 Eastern time. We'd love for you to join us, and here's how it works. You're going to submit questions when you register. You're going to have a chance to basically hang out with us for about an hour. It's going to be a Q&A. You get to maybe ask questions about fantasy football if you're so inclined, or if you want to just talk nonsense, that's always game during these live shows. And for those of you that are wondering, how is it different from our other live shows? Well, we understand it's different because it's virtual, and we also understand that you get the podcast every single day, but this is going to be exclusive. It's not going to be broadcast to the world, and registration is free, which is nice. Space is limited. I mentioned yesterday we were really limited on space. We found a little bit more room, which is good. So
yes,
we've crossed the first threshold that we thought we could attain, and instead we're like, oh, wow, we have the ability to add even more space in this.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Yeah.
Friday, it's week 2 in the NFL.
Oh,
a must-win already for
Sounds
the
like
Browns.
we've got some wires crossed right now. Those are the
scenario?
dulcet tones of Zubin Mehenti that you hear right now. I don't think. Okay, there we go. It's all gone. But last thing. So go to bit.ly, which is ly/fantasyfocusfootball. It's all lowercase today. That's bit.ly/fantasyfocusfootball. To snag a seat and have some fun with us, hanging out with the 06010. A reminder that Fantasy Focus Football virtual events are presented by Geico. Geico is now offering an extra 15% credit on car, motorcycle, and RV policies. Visit geico.com for more. And Marathon, fueling the American spirit.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
News or noise?
Loud noises!
All right, let's get in some news or noise from Wednesday. First practice reports of the week for those teams that are playing on Sunday. And Stephania, it's not just Mike Evans we have to worry about amongst the Bucs wide receivers. What's the deal with Chris Godwin?
Chris Godwin's in the concussion protocol, and I think it surprised some people because, in particular, that he spoke with media after the game. He took a hit in the game. Everything supposedly was fine. He was cleared. He was fine the next day. But as we've talked about before on this podcast, you can have a delayed onset of symptoms. It's not especially common, but certainly if a player comes to the facility and reports anything that sounds concussion-like, they take precautions and put you into the protocol to undergo testing and rest, etc. So no practice for Chris Godwin, and we will stand by to get updates.
Yeah, unquestionably, this is news. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Was there a sounder there?
No, it was me pulling up the YouTube video so that I could rewatch what Stefania just said because it was so good the first time. I just said, I'm like,
we've got Zubin's voice. We've got Stefania's second voice. I'm getting
me.
confused here. I'm just a young boy trying to figure out how to survive in this world. This is news, obviously, Mike, because Chris Godwin's one of the best wide receivers in football. And as Stefania laid out, just because these symptoms were described by Bruce Arians as mild, we don't know what that means. We don't know if this is going to impact his availability for Sunday or not. So let's just discuss the possibility that he doesn't play on Sunday. And not saying this will happen, but Scottie Miller was already on the waiver wire column, Mike. If I could rewrite the waiver wire column I would still have the running backs at the top of the list, the Malcolm Browns and the Nyheim Hines of the world. But would Scottie Miller be the number one wide receiver add from week 1?
It's close. I think that certainly he's
Paris
an option.
Campbell, another name.
I will say this, though. A lot of people think that Scottie Miller, because he's small, is a slot receiver. So
he's not that
perhaps
small, though.
he would kind of slide right in there for Chris Godwin. That's not the case. He plays on the outside. He played outside last season. He had one of the highest average depth of targets in the league, and we saw that last week as well. So what I think would happen if Godwin were to sit out, you would have Mike Evans on one side, you have Scottie Miller on the other side, and you have Justin Watson in the slot. So that's how I think it would work out. Either way, it's a great matchup for the Bucs offense. I think we'll all be talking about them quite a bit over the next few days. Obviously, Carolina rebuilding that defense, very young, and the matchups are outstanding for Godwin if he plays, Mike Evans, Scottie Miller. So definitely Miller will be on the flex radar if Godwin sits out.
Okay, and also keep Justin Watson on your mind or on your radar if you
very
play
deep sleeper.
Daily fantasy, perhaps would be a much more relevant consideration there. Man, Stephania, every time I turn, I ask you about a 49ers injury. But let's get to the latest on George Kittle because, of course, from fantasy perspective, that is the most pertinent 49ers injury right now.
Yes, we will start with George Kittle because there's something optimistic to look towards, which is that they hope that he will be available to play against the Jets this weekend. In fact, George Kittle expects to play, and I'll share with you some of what Kyle Shanahan said because I think it's pretty telling. He said that he's battling. He fully expects to be there Sunday like he always does, and just like he always plays through the game when it happens. You know, he did play in the second half last week, even though he didn't do much. Shanahan went on to say, we'll give him the whole week. We'd love to get him out there on Friday, even just for a walkthrough. And he said he's a guy that is ready to go on Sunday. And if the doctor says he's good to go, we have no problem with him going without practicing. So don't be alarmed if he doesn't practice at all. We'd like to see him out there Friday, but it sounds like they're very hopeful. And George Kittle expects to play on Sunday. Just one other note, they do expect Brandon Ayuk to make his debut this weekend.
Okay, that seems like good news there for George Kittle. A couple of the names. This is I would say it's news as well, Mike. Good news that George Kittle expects to play, or at least has a chance to play on Sunday. Just for those that may be looking to ensure their roster, any tight ends you love this week, maybe Jordan Reed, maybe Dallas Goedert, maybe others.
I would say, Goddard, I have to imagine, was scooped up in quite a few leagues. If he's still out there, definitely an option. If you just want, again, like it's a deeper league and you want that emergency insurance, it's Jordan Reed, of course. I'm not sure he would see 8 targets in the game, but actually in week 1, no 49er had more than 5 targets. They were spreading the ball around quite a bit. So that would be the case again. But yeah, if you have a roster spot, you want to throw Reed there just to be safe, that's fine. Otherwise, you could go out and scoop up one of those top 16 or 17 tight ends if one happens to be out there on the waiver wire.
I'm being incredibly selfish right now. Normally what happens during News or Noise is Daniel takes the lead. And Daniel says, here is the topic, and we decide if it's news or noise. So, Daniel, I'm going to hand this right back over to you. This is your show.
Oh, Field.
I apologize.
No, it's all right. I figured because you were wearing the hat today that we were doing hat things, so we were just kind of
I didn't
sharing
get that
the
memo,
segment.
by the way, so thanks. Yeah.
Shout out PLL, baby.
Got my hat.
No big deal. All right, here's a question. Miles Sanders, back at practice, Stephania. News or noise with Miles Sanders being back, and should we have any concerns about limitations once he gets on the field?
It's news. Everybody's hopeful. Miles Sanders was a high draft pick for a lot of fantasy football managers, and he was a full participant yesterday. In fact, they say he looks ready. I think they're already anticipating that he will play. Obviously, anytime a player has a hamstring injury, we like to see him get through a full game before we are ready to say, yep, they're totally good. This is behind them. That being said, they felt like he was not too far away last week and just decided to err on the side of caution. Understandable since the Eagles have been dealt the injury bug at wide receiver and then running back both. So probably smart for them that they waited it out, but it sounds like Miles Sanders will be out there this weekend.
Well, Stephania, they also are 0-1, so it may not be that smart according to Matthew Berry of the Washington football team. Mike, news or noise?
Definitely news. Also news is the fact that Lane Johnson's expected back at right tackle. That's huge because if you watch that game, you saw the Eagles kind of move down the field a couple times, and then the line just kind of fell apart, right? It was just a lot of replacement parts, and Wentz was under pressure a ton. But I will say a couple things here. Boston Scott was doing pretty good before the injury, 54 yards on 11 touches, so he seems like he disappointed filling in, but really got hurt. He was doing pretty well before that. So the running game was working even without a functional offensive line. We know Sanders can contribute a lot in the passing game, 3+ catches in 12 of his past 13 games. We like that. And we also like that the Rams allowed 159 scrimmage yards and 2 touchdowns to Cowboys running backs last week. A lot of that was Zeke Elliott, but Tony Pollard made some plays as well. So there's a lot of things to like. If you drafted him and he's able to go and there's no report that he's only going to play 10 snaps or something, you put him in your lineup.
I was saying this yesterday on the show. There are a number of very plausible round 1 plus round 2 draft scenarios that people are already feeling snake bitten, as in Michael Thomas in the first half of the first round, plus, let's say, I use yesterday's example, was Austin Eckler, or Michael Thomas plus maybe Kenny Galladay and Miles Sanders would be a 1-2 pairing. So for people that are feeling like they lost their league before we've even reached the first game of week 2, patience is a virtue. Miles Sanders expected back, and that's great things for your lineup.
Yep. Next one up, Stephania Bell. John Brown sidelined by a foot injury on a Wednesday. Going to start with you. News or noise on John Brown's foot injury for Sunday?
I love that you call me Stefania Bell. Like you might confuse me with another Stefania.
I just put respect on your name, Stephania. That's all that it is.
Yes, you did. Respect. This is going to be a deferred news or noise because we only have 1 day's worth and not a ton of information. John Brown, who played 81 of 87 snaps last week, no evidence of an injury, but then held out of practice because of a foot ailment. So Thursday becomes a big day to see if he actually returns, if it was more of a maintenance day, or if this is something that could threaten his status for the weekend.
Real quick for you guys, understanding that not only for John Brown, but then Stefan Diggs and Josh Allen, like how would that affect them spinning forward if he missed time?
I was going to say it's noise for this reason, that John Brown, although he had a good week 1, obviously, was not a player that a lot of people were planning on utilizing in their lineup right now. So I don't want to mitigate what a player's going through. Obviously, this is his health, and that matters most. But if this was Stefan Diggs, then it would certainly be a very newsworthy topic for fantasy football purposes only. So we'll keep an eye on this one here, Mike. And I don't know that it necessarily impacts Stefan Diggs that much if he sits. I mean, Diggs had 8 catches last week. The volume was outstanding in week 1.
Well, no question about it. The Bills, believe it or not, had 3 or more receivers on the field for every single pass play they ran. And in fact, they had 4 on the field for 31%. They wanted to get Gabriel Davis out there. So if John Brown sits out, they're going to, like their mid-round pick, they're going to have him on the field pretty much for every play. So that's a name to watch, certainly in deeper dynasty
Great training
leagues.
camp,
I'm with you 100%. In fact, in my meticulous notes here, I wrote noise because we already want to sit Brown, right? I mean, we don't really want to start him. He's wide receiver 44 on my board, even healthy. And it's actually a tough matchup, believe it or not, because Miami, remember, they invested a lot in the cornerback position, a first-round pick. You have Xavier Howard on one side. You have Byron Jones, one of the best corners in the league, on the other side. And Brown lines up outside 90% of the time. So he's going to be on one of those two, assuming Howard plays more this week, the entire game. So it's a tough matchup. You know, now he's not 100%. Wide receiver super deep. We know that. So I already don't really want to start him. So for this, with this in mind, I'm basically just keeping him on my bench.
All righty.
All right, Stefania, we had a couple other injury updates from practice. I want to throw to you a couple quick hitters that you have for us here that we just need to know about.
Yeah, Devante Parker, who obviously had a setback with the hamstring, was out at practice yesterday, and I think people said, oh, full pads practice, that's good. But actually, Cameron Wolfe, our colleague there who covers the Dolphins, had tweeted something interesting that Brian Flores said, which was that Parker didn't really do much in practice yesterday. He's still being hampered by the hamstring. But he said that they weren't going to take his soft tissue injury history into consideration when deciding whether to play him on Sunday or not, to which I say, So that's Devante Parker's update. As far as Kenny Galladay, I'm sorry, Daniel, still not practicing. Not looking great so far for your Lions, for Kenny Galladay. And then Cortland Sutton for the Broncos was out of practice yesterday, making some catches at about shoulder height. So still not getting the arm overhead, which is a big thing to look for, but definitely doing a little bit more and at least trending the right direction for this week.
All right. Thank you for all that, Stefania. Did you know that right now Geico is offering an extra 15% credit on car, motorcycle, and RV policies? That's 15% on top of the money Geico could already save you. So what are you waiting for? George Kittle to practice in full before Sunday so nobody has any reservations about how limited it'll be in week 2? Well, listen, as great as that would be, it's probably not going to happen, guys. You're just going to have to trust Stephania on this one. But at least there's never been a better time to switch to Geico. Save an extra 15% when you switch by October 7th. Visit geico.com to learn more.
Time for a game preview.
Game preview.
Bengals play the Browns tonight, as we mentioned earlier on in the show. First time we get to see Joe Burrow by himself, standalone national TV game on the 100th anniversary of the NFL being born, which is very exciting, in Canton, Ohio, 100 years ago today. Let's get into this game, Mike, right away. The Bengals are actually 6-point underdogs going to Cleveland. Not a far trip by any stretch, but still a trip. Joe Burrow makes both Daniel and my top 15 quarterbacks. You've got him at number 20. Let me throw you the reason why I think it's possible he has a nice night. First of all, there were some impressive moments in week one.
Definitely.
Most impressive was the 23-yard designed quarterback draw touchdown run from Joe Burrow. Mm-hmm. That was encouraging. And I know that he's not Lamar Jackson, not yet at least, and probably he never will be as an athlete. But, we think he's got a chance to emerge as a franchise quarterback. But the Browns right now, going into this game, have already ruled out 3 cornerbacks. And the same 3 cornerbacks they were without this past week. Or maybe it's 2 cornerbacks, but still, it's multiple.
2 of the top 3.
2 of their top 3 cornerbacks are out. Greedy Williams and also Kevin Johnson, who's got a lacerated kidney, and Williams has been banged up for quite some time. We know that Grant Delpit's on IR. The Browns' defense was an absolute mess this past week. Olivier Vernon is questionable to play for them. Their pass-rushing defensive end, opposite of Myles Garrett. This is a team in Cleveland that I am worried about already. I know that sounds like a broken record, but I think Joe Burrow could be in for a nice night here, and I wrote this on the waiver wire column. He's got a pretty reasonable stretch coming up here, and that because of who he is and how exciting he is and the fact that he's number 1 pick, your best opportunity to get Joe Burrow on the waiver wire was probably either before week 1 or a couple of days ago, because if he has a great night tonight, the train leaves the station and he's never coming back available to the waiver wire.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm going to start with positives here because I am in the low end, but there were 2 things I liked, okay? So 8 carries, 46 yards, and a touchdown on the ground. I mean, that's Josh Allen-like, right?
Sure.
I mean, out of the gate in terms of rushing production. So you'd love to see that. I don't think any of us expected him to run quite that much. If that continues, QB1 is absolutely on the radar in terms of, top 10 or top 12 fantasy season. And also 44 dropbacks against a good Chargers pass defense. They came out throwing. It wasn't like, we got a rookie quarterback, let's just run the ball all day with Joe Mixon. They threw the ball a lot in that game. But he was still QB 20 in fantasy points. He only had 193 yards. He had a 5.4 yards per attempt. I mean, it's going to take some time. There's going to be bumps in the roads. He's going to turn the ball over. So you add that into the fact that quarterback, as we know, is very deep. There's a lot of options, a lot of safer options. I hear what you're saying on the Browns' pass defense, and maybe I'll get this completely wrong because the efficiency will be much better this week, but I just think you have safer options. So should he be on benches? Yes.
Right.
Should he be in lineups? I don't think so. Not this week.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are ready to put him in our starting lineup, but it is interesting to note that if you have any interest in grabbing Joe Burrow, I still am of the mind that you better do it before the game tonight.
Yeah, but some people are like, it's Thursday night. I'm excited for football. I have Burrow on my bench. I'm just going to put him in there and see how, and maybe it'll work out. But
don't be one of those people.
I'm not doing that yet.
Don't be one of those people. Joe Mixon last week had 19 carries for 69 yards. He had a catch for 2 yards. He did fumble the ball as well, if I'm not mistaken. So that brought him down to 6.1 points, Mike. He was a first-round pick in a lot of people's drafts. Were you disappointed this past week? And does it mean anything if you were?
Not really. I mean, that was about as expected. I was kind of low on Mixon because there was no signal that he was going to see more passing down work, right? And we saw that in the game. 19 carries, but only 2 targets. He ran 12 pass routes. Gio Bernard ran 10 and was targeted 5 times. They're still using him in that area. So that didn't tell me that they're going to throw to him more often, and that's a concern for his RB1 status this season. The Browns defense also very good against the Ravens running backs, believe it or not. They got crushed in that game. They allowed 2.9 yards per carry and only 72 scrimmage yards to that Ingram and Dobbins and Edwards group. That was second fewest in the league last season. I will say this, Mixon, the Browns defense, very similar to last year, and Mixon rolled over them in both games, 186 yards and a touchdown on 26 touches and 176 yards and 2 touchdowns on 27 touches. So conflicting here a little bit, but he's RB14 on my board. In most formats, you're still starting.
Yeah, the optimism coming into the season for me with Joe Mixon was simply I thought they would score a bunch more touchdowns, and I think this is a talented player reflected in that 4-year, $48 million extension. Offensive line would be better. I just thought the offensive operation would just be more productive for everybody, and Mixon was solid last season, and it's like you knock him up a couple of pegs, and next thing you know, you've got yourself a top 10 running back for the 2020 season. Too early to write him off, even despite those week 1 struggles. The 2 wide receivers are kind of fun and interesting. Mike, I wonder how different our A.J. Green analysis would be if he had caught that touchdown last week, or at least I should say the touchdown had stood. For those that missed it, there was is controversy too strong of a word? Controversial offensive pass interference? Yeah. It was a debatable offensive pass interference call against A.J. Green. I thought it was not an A.J. Green offensive pass interference. But if you include that, it's a 6 catch for 58 yard and a touchdown day. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's the guy that over the course of his career had averaged over 80 yards per game and over a half touchdown per game. That's the guy. That touchdown is taken off the board. He ends up with just 10.1 fantasy points. But I was just talking about those cornerbacks who are out for Cleveland. Mike, I mean, it should stand to reason that nobody stands to benefit more than A.J. Green because of those injuries.
No question. He'll see some Denzel Ward. I don't think Ward will shadow him. Ward is very good, one of the better young corners in the league, but Cleveland didn't shadow at all last season. So I think he'll see Ward. He'll see Terrence Mitchell on the other side, who's decent in his own right. Good depth corner for sure, so he'll step in. But look, I'm high on A.J. Green. He's 13th on my board. I'm buying in here. He was on the field for about 2/3 of the snaps in that game, 9 targets. That was 4 more than any other Bengals player. So clearly him and Joe Burrow are on the same page. He threw to him quite a bit. I mentioned he had 9 targets. He averaged 8.6 in 2018. He was at 8.7 his past 5 seasons. So he's basically right on track to where he's been. And we know, look, the last time we saw him in 2018, he was the number 7 scoring receiver when he was healthy. So 13th, I think that might be low. If he's the real deal and he's healthy and he's good to go and Burrow keeps throwing to him, he can very well be a wide receiver 1. So I'm happy with that. He's a decent matchup like we laid out. So I want him in my lineup for sure.
I just realized, and I might need Kyle to help me out here on this. This offseason, the Browns signed an undrafted free agent out of Nebraska who plays defensive back. His name is A.J. Green. Mm-hmm. I don't know if A.J. Green is now on the Browns practice squad or if he is potentially like the 53rd man on their roster.
Yeah, he's not on the active roster.
Well, that needs to change by tonight.
It does.
So Andrew Berry, excellent Browns general manager.
Just for one snap,
guy.
Please.
Yeah, I know you're out there listening. Let's get A.J. Green on the roster tonight because I want nothing more this Thursday than to see A.J. Green covering A.J. Green. Of course, the Browns do have the ability, right? They have the ability to bring a player up from the practice squad. They did it this past Saturday with a separate cornerback. Maybe A.J. Green's time to shine comes tonight.
Phil, do you mind if I real quick go to Stephania and ask if there are any updates that we need to know about on A.J. Green? You all right with that?
Yeah, of course. Would be my great honor to have you ask Stephania that.
Stephania.
I just think like yesterday we were talking about checking boxes for Ben Roethlisberger, and I think this was a really important game for me to watch A.J. Green, who we know he missed all of last year because of the ankle, but he also had a little hamstring issue. Not a big deal, but he had a little hamstring issue in the preseason, which he declared himself fully recovered from. I like the way, obviously, he ran without hesitation. He was clearly targeted. And Mike, you already alluded to the snap percentage. He was on the field for 45 snaps, which I thought just showed you that they're going to work him in. But to be targeted as much as he was and yet play fewer snaps than a couple of the other receivers, I think that will continue to increase as they get more comfortable with him being on the field. But he looked good to me. There was nothing I saw that would make me apprehensive. Now, if we see a couple more games like that, then I think we can start to feel really good about A.J. Green's health going forward.
All right, encouraging news on the health front for A.J. Green as well. Let's talk about Tyler Boyd, who last week I had 4 catches for 33 yards on 5 targets. Mike, I was asking this question before the show, off camera and off mic, obviously, was wondering, like, it's hard to call too many players buy lows or sell highs 1 week into the season, especially buy lows. But would Tyler Boyd sort of check that box, to borrow Stephania's term, for you? I mean, he is a player with back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and all of a sudden, in terms of the rankings gap right now, we've got he and A.J. Green, who were drafted right next to each other in terms of ADP, close to 20 spots apart in week 2 wide receiver rankings.
And look, Boyd, I agree with you, absolutely. Boyd was on receiver-cornerback matchups last week as a downgrade. Why? Because he faced Chris Harris Jr., one of the best slot corners in the NFL over the past decade. So it was a tough matchup. He had 33 yards on 5 targets. That was not a shock. But he was on the field for 34 out of 39 pass plays. So he's still out there. Even with Greenback, he's still a full-time player. He's going to be fine. Has a much better matchup this week in the slot against Cleveland. The Browns actually allowed the most fantasy points to players lined up in the slot last week. And I think a little bit of that was like Mark Andrews running routes out of the slot. But nonetheless, Tyler Boyd, a pretty good target out of the slot. So keep that in mind. He's wide receiver 36 on my board. So a flex option if you're in a 12-plus team league. He's a wide receiver 3 option. So absolutely still think Boyd will be in for a terrific season.
Okay, so Tyler Boyd should be one of those players that we have a lot less worries about after week 2 than we did after week 1. Let's discuss the Browns. And there really isn't a fantasy football conversation about Baker Mayfield specifically right now. Not ranked for us, which means he's outside of our top 20 for quarterbacks. He was really bad last week. He had less than 10 fantasy points. He was picked off, 189 total passing yards, completed just over 50% of his passes. Mike, I sort of wonder if this is more of a football than a fantasy football conversation, which we were also having before the show began today. I'm nervous, Mike, and Baker Mayfield is in the second week of his third season. This is not a player with a long resume. But all of a sudden, like, it can get late early in your NFL career. I'm nervous about this player and what it means for the Browns going forward. If they do not strike big tonight on offense tonight, then I think it's got major real football implications for the Browns at the quarterback spot. But it would make me very nervous about the wide receivers we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. But was he a victim of a bad matchup last week in your estimation, or just a player that maybe just has some fundamental flaws that caused people during the pre-draft process 2 years ago to say, wait, he's going first overall? Like, he eventually kind of came around in the consensus, but there was a time where Baker Mayfield was thought of as like a 4th-round pick before his final year. Maybe like a mid-first-round pick by the end of the pre-draft process. Some people were very surprised he went first overall. Where were you at? Or where are you at now?
Well, I was high on him for sure. So we'll see how this plays out. I'm hoping that he turns it around quickly. And yes, that was a very tough matchup. He went up against one of the best teams, one of the best defenses in the NFL in week 1. So I don't want to go crazy, right? Because Kevin Stefanski's there, and he did a terrific job with Kirk Cousins, really getting the most out of him last season. So I still think there's plenty of reason to think he can get back on track in this game and beyond. But you're right. He didn't play much better last week. He didn't play well last season. And honestly, he was one of the worst, the least effective quarterbacks in the league, we'll say, when he wasn't under pressure. And that's usually a warning sign for a quarterback. So maybe that was a product of the offense and what was going on there. But there's no real excuses this season, as you and I discussed before the show. I mean, the weapons are there. The offensive line, one of the best in the NFL. You have one of the best 1-2 punches at wide receiver. You have, even with David Njoku gone, Hunter Bryant's playing very well. Did I get the right Bryant there?
Yeah, that was right. Hunter Bryant. Yeah,
it's Hunter Bryant. There's Harrison Bryant and Hunter Bryant. They're rookie tight ends. But you have Austin Hooper there.
Now you're making me question it. Hunter Bryant was
Hunter Bryant was drafted by the Lions.
That's right. Harrison Bryant, Florida Atlantic, John Mackey Award winner.
That's what it was. Paris Campbell, Paris Hilton. It was one of those things.
It's
one of those guys.
I'm going to mess up a name every week. We might as well knock it out now. Anyway, I don't know what I was talking about now, but anyway, he has a great supporting cast, 2 good running backs. You got the gist of it. He has a great group of weapons around him, and I don't know if the leash is super long here. If he struggles for a couple weeks, they did sign someone in the offseason, a seasoned, scrappy veteran named Case Keenum.
That's right. 2 reminders. The Browns paid Case Keenum 3 years and $18 million this offseason. The Browns also, and I want you to go back, for those that may have missed this at the time, go back and check out the Adam Schefter podcast shortly after Cam Newton signed with the Patriots. And there was one team besides the Patriots that called about Cam Newton. It's the Cleveland Browns. Now, Adam made very clear at the time that it was not a lengthy conversation, didn't get very far. But the fact that the Browns thought to call Cam Newton with Baker Mayfield and Case Keenum already under contract, it's one of those things that, like, it's hard to forget once you hear it once. So anyways, a much more football-related conversation than fantasy football. We'll talk about the wide receivers and what it means for them for a second, but fascinating night ahead for Baker Mayfield. The matchup is great. It's really good. But his offensive line is banged up. 3 offensive linemen are questionable for this game. Jack Conklin, left tackle Jedrick Wills, their first-round pick who got hurt last week, and J.C. Treader, who did play last week, so we expect, it seems like at least 2 out of those 3 will play, but still worth noting. Also, Chris Hubbard, a backup offensive lineman, their top swing tackle, inactive last week due to injury, also questionable. So a lot of guys banged up for Cleveland, but they should be able to move the ball against this Bengals defense, which I think, Mike, means a better day is ahead for Nick Chubb. Now, just like we were talking about how the gap got really wide with A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd, we have the inverse with the Browns running backs. It got really narrow between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. We still prefer Chubb to Hunt. What do you need to see tonight from Nick Chubb to make you feel at ease with your probably early second round, at best late second round selection of Nick Chubb?
Certainly more volume, right? More carries inside the 50-yard line. It just didn't work out. He got game scripted basically in week one. So I'm a little higher than the consensus on Chubb this week. Look, he played 33 snaps in week one. He ran 16 pass routes, which, believe it or not, was more than Kareem Hunt. I mean, that's a surprise. Definitely didn't expect that. 10 carries, 1 target in that game, still at 66 total yards. So by all measures, getting game scripted, he did okay. But look, like I said, Cleveland only called 1 run play inside the Ravens' 24-yard line in week one. We need him to get goal line carries. When they move the ball near the goal line, he needs to get those, and he will going forward. So I think better days are ahead. Chargers running backs, by the way, against Cincinnati in week one, 33 carries for 148 yards. Both were second most in the NFL. Geno Atkins, Mike Daniels, both out for this game, which helps Nick Chubb running between the tackles.
Sure. Just thinking about what you're saying about how sort of the imperfect game script hit Nick Chubb last week. Imperfect game script hit Austin Eckler last week as well for the Chargers. We talked about this on the show a couple of days ago, is that he carried the ball 19 times and caught it just once because they didn't need him to be catching 8 passes in a game because they were down by 14 points. So hopefully Nick Chubb has a much more favorable game script. And Kareem Hunt, Mike, I think he sort of solidified why he can be, probably at worst a flex consideration each week. He got enough volume last week, and he's going to be involved in the passing game. He had 7 targets last week. Kareem Hunt's one of the best pass-catching running backs in the NFL. That alone gives him basically flex consideration every single Sunday or Thursday, even if Nick Chubb is cooking.
Yeah, no question about it. So I think he'll be okay, and I think if you drafted him, you still put him in your lineup.
All right, let's get to the wide receivers because that is where the struggles of Baker Mayfield really do rear themselves. Last week, Odell Beckham had, I thought it was 10 targets. I only see 8 targets here, but I could have sworn it might have
I have 10 on my notes.
Okay, so 10 targets last week for Odell Beckham and 2 catches, right? 2 catches, 22 yards on 10 targets. The volume was great. If I told you Odell Beckham Jr., if I told you 10 targets in any given week blindly, I would be putting him on my lineup, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. Volume is king.
So, the harmony for Odell Beckham Jr. and this offense has been off for a year and a week now, right? But I think last year, and I was willing to dismiss last year and just say, hey, it's that was the most JV operation the NFL has ever seen. You got to figure that things can only go up. Odell is still wildly, insanely talented. I mean, the guy rewrote record books in his first 3 seasons in the NFL. It's got to get better, right? It didn't get better last week. All right. We said this for a few players, but if it does not get better if it does not get right tonight, Mike, I mean, DEFCON level 7. If he doesn't get right tonight, I mean, where do we go?
I think it's going to be a big problem because we kind of expected a bounce back because he underwhelmed last season, and still we just went all in drafts pretty much. I mean, a lot of people drafted him very early, so you're kind of expecting him to turn the corner.
Specifically,
I will say this: you love the targets for sure. You love the 10 targets. We already covered that. And he only had 22 yards in this game, but I thought this was interesting. Last season, in 2 games against the Ravens, he had 60 yards. He averaged 30 yards a game in those 2 games. At 20, as mentioned, 22 in week 1. He averaged 69.4 yards in every other game last season. So that's a huge difference from where he was, against Baltimore the last 3 games. So maybe brighter days are ahead for Odell Beckham, and he's going to face William Jackson and Darius Phillips in this game. So I mean, it's a much better matchup. So there is hope that he could get back on track. And I'm sure some people are thinking maybe I shouldn't put him in my lineup. Should I just find someone else? Unless you're in a really shallow league, I think that's going to be hard to do. But I definitely think there's a chance he gets back on track.
1 year ago today, he had his best play for the Browns. I believe it was the 87-yard slant he caught against the Jets after Greg Williams sort of made the comment about Odell. He said something that, I don't know, whatever. He underestimated Odell, and Odell came back to get the last laugh here, which maybe you can have the same thing happen. Deja vu all over again on September 17th.
Can you fault fantasy managers for overreacting and being like, boy, I've got, Marvin Jones, or I've got fill in the blank like flex wide receiver that they're starting over OBJ because there's no confidence in Baker, and it's like, maybe I want to see it first. Like, is this one of those stop thinking and just put OBJ in your lineup until we get to the point where we say all right, now we're worried about it? Now
that's where I would be, and I think I'll speak for Mike. He would be as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wide receiver 22, so that's where I am on my board. That's where I'm starting him. But if you are deep at that spot, maybe you hit on someone and you have a lot of good options in that area, it's not the worst idea in the world, especially if you start like 2 receivers and 1 flex. You might have 2 better receivers. It's very possible. So I'm not totally opposed to it, but
a lot of our listeners are obviously very smart, but we also have people that I say this nonstop. They play with emotions. I mean, I had people telling me coming into the year, they would ask for my top 5 picks, and I would have Alvin Kamara in my top 5. I say, no way I'm taking Alvin Kamara in the top 5. No way whatsoever. No chance. He was terrible last year. Well, right now, if we were redrafting, he might go 1 overall based off of week 1, right? So, like, that's the risk reward of fantasy football. I would personally play Odell Beckham Jr. tonight. I think, Daniel, that conversation starts up as soon as tomorrow if he stinks.
Yeah.
If he stinks tonight, that conversation is game on. Let's go back to Stephania for an injury update on his compadre in the wide receiver room. That is Jarvis Landry. Very tough, Stephania, but he is questionable for this game.
Yeah, I think the questionable is a formality. He is expected to play. Remember, he came off pretty significant hip surgery. Both he and teammate Odell underwent off-season surgeries, but the surgery that Jarvis Landry underwent was actually pretty substantial in terms of his hip. Didn't miss any time last year, but it really bothered him down the stretch. And he actually said going into week 1 that he thought the snap count he would be on would depend on the game plan. I thought that they might really ease him in, knowing that he hadn't faced any competition in the preseason. But it didn't really seem like that happened. So wouldn't be surprised on a short week. It's obvious he didn't practice on Tuesday. I mean, none of that really shocked me. So I expect that he will play tonight. Obviously, check your pregame inactives. But I think the expectation is that he's going to be out there again.
All right. Good news for Jarvis Landry. And he had 5 catches for 61 yards in week 1. You know what he did? He did a Jarvis Landry night, right? Like you extrapolate that over a 16-game season. It's 80 catches for about 1,000 yards. Like that's what Jarvis Landry does.
Right on track.
Right? So it wasn't a massive night, but he has those in him, and it's going to be pretty rare that Jarvis Landry does not meet expectations as a flex consideration weekly. David Njoku went down last week, Mike, and he's now on injured reserve. Austin Hooper, at the time of his signing, became the highest paid tight end in NFL history, but he actually is 20 in my ranks and Daniel's ranks and 21st in your ranks. Are you surprised yourself that he didn't rank higher in your tight end projections?
Yeah. Are we sleeping on him? I think we might be.
I think so too.
I think we might be. And the only issue is there's a lot of similar options in that range, right? Tight end. I said before the season this might be the year of the breakout tight end because there's just so many interesting names in that area, and that's kind of the problem here. But look, week 1 he played 51 of 67 snaps his first game with the Browns, only had 2 targets, but his 25 pass routes, 12th most in the league among tight ends. So that's interesting, I thought, and that was with David Njoku playing a pretty big role in that game. He had the 3 targets and the touchdown. Also, potentially a good matchup. Hunter Henry had a good game against the Bengals last week. 7 targets, 5 catches, 73 yards. The Bengals allowed 83 yards overall to Chargers tight ends. That was second most in the NFL last week. So again, small sample, but just a couple interesting nuggets here that make me think maybe Hooper kind of gets it going here, especially with Njoku out of the mix.
Hooper's a friend of the program. We met him at the Super Bowl this past year. He likes the fantasy football, so karma's coming his way. And maybe by this time next week, we're talking about him as a must-start with one less tight end in the Browns rotation, and obviously very talented guy. Who you got in this game tonight, Mike? Browns favored 6 points at home. They winning?
Believe it or not, I have the Browns winning 24-20, but I have the Bengals covering.
Okay, Daniel, how about you?
I have the Bengals. Sorry, not cool, Keith. I am going with the Bengals.
You know what? Me too, Daniel. Great pick right there. That's a nice pick.
Yeah, take that, Keith.
I'm wearing my Bengals, my Joe Burrow LSU yellow right now. Stefania, who do you think's going to win this game tonight?
I'm going to take the Browns.
You guys are so
Good job, Stefania.
boring. Anyways, we'll find out at 8:20 Eastern Time.
Wait, who's going to win at 8:20, or that's when the game
That's
starts?
when the game starts.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
When do I know who wins?
8:22.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Shell knows that between every
already told
tee up,
you.
layup, and batter up, that you can't wait to catch up with your favorite podcast. So come to Shell and get 3 things done at once. First, fill up with Shell V-Power Nitro Plus to help keep your engine running like new. Then, save up with the Fuel Rewards program and never pay full price for gas again. And finally, snack up with in-store rewards to save even more at the pump. Time to wrap it up. Make the most of the stop you need to make with Shell. in engines that continuously use Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline. See full terms and conditions at fuelrewards.com.
You know, it sure was nice seeing the teams back out there in the gridiron over the weekend.
That was.
Like for us, that was just week 1. There's no better place to get in on all the action than with DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy sports. To add to this week's excitement, DraftKings has millions of dollars in total prizes up for grabs. If you haven't tried DraftKings yet, head to the App Store now because you're not going to want to miss this. Draft your lineup now. Feel the sweat like never before with every run, pass, and catch. They mean so much more with a DraftKings lineup on the line. It's simple. Just pick your lineup, stay under the salary cap, and see how your team stacks up against CSS DFS. It's simple. Nothing adds to the excitement of watching the game quite like having a shot at millions of dollars in prizes, and DraftKings has paid out billions to winners since 2012. Billions, people! So they know a thing or two about cold, hard cash. Download the DraftKings app now and use code FOCUS. For a limited time, new users can get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes this week. Don't miss out on all of the Week 2 action. Enter code FOCUS to get a free shot at millions of dollars in prizes with your first deposit. That's code FOCUS. Only at DraftKings. Make it rain with a minimum $5 deposit required. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details.
All right, Daniel. You know about the wide receiver cornerback matchup?
It's one of my favorite articles that I read every single week.
Tell me a little bit more about how you find it, what it is, what it encompasses, and how great of a job I do writing it.
So you do a phenomenal job.
Thank
with
you.
It. You break down different.
Oh,
you don't. Oh, this isn't your column. Oh,
That's
Mike
Matthews.
writes this one. Oh,
Matthew?
Wait.
I don't know.
I don't know who writes this. Mike, every week you look at the different shadow matchups that we have in the NFL. You kind of tell us which wide receivers we should be excited about, which ones we shouldn't be excited about. Do you want to jump right in here? Because there's a Colts matchup that I am dying to hear about.
I can, and my daughter writes it, by the way.
Oh, does she?
Yeah.
All right. Got it. Watch out, Dylan.
That's what kids are for, right? Help me do my job, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, this week she wrote that T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell have a good matchup against the Minnesota Vikings, believe it or
I would
not.
agree. Great call by her.
And there was a time where we feared the Vikings defense, and I don't know if we can after their renovation of that position in the offseason and after what happened against the Packers last week. So, look, the Vikings, the future may be bright. There's high pedigree at that group, but they are rebuilding it right now. You have 2020 rookies Jeff Gladney and Cameron Dantzler playing significant roles back there. 2018 first-round pick Mike Hughes is playing in the slot right now, and then they have a 2018 UDFA Holton Hill also involved. That's their top 4 corners right now. And again, it didn't go well against the Packers last week. No team allowed more fantasy points to wide receivers than the Vikings in week 1, the 5th most to outside receivers, and that is where you're going to see a lot of the work from T.Y. Hilton. He was outside 90% of the time last week, and Zach Pascal will work out there too. And then, of course, you have Paris Campbell in the slot. He's going to see Mike Hughes, the Vikings' 7th most fantasy points to the slot last week as well. But I thought this was interesting. This is the stat line of Packers wide receivers, just wide receivers in week 1. 27 targets, 22 catches, 315 yards, 4 touchdowns. And that wasn't just Devontae Adams. It was Valdez-Scantling and it was Alan Lazard. So across the board, we're upgrading this Colts offense. And T.Y. Hilton, you drafted to start. You're going to start him. Paris Campbell looked good in week 1. You're going to put him in your lineup as well.
Okay. There you have it. T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell both finding a way to make it into your lineup. T.Y. Hilton, I'd like to see even more of, obviously, the number 1 wide receiver in that offense on paper, though Campbell was the guy that shined in week 1. The Chiefs travel to SoFi to play the Chargers this weekend in Los Angeles. Keenan Allen, not a great, memorable week 1, Mike, but the matchup for the Chiefs, as we sort of saw with Will Fuller last week, might be one that works in his favor, especially because Bashaud Breeland is still out on suspension. The Chiefs obviously won handily against Houston, but is the matchup right for Keenan Allen to bounce back this Sunday?
I think it is. Now, Steve Spagnuolo, I don't know how he's done it, but he has done a magnificent job turning around this Chiefs defense. Remember how much they struggled in Mahomes' breakout year?
Of course, yeah.
They seemed to get worse on paper last season, and they were really good. And then this season, they seem even worse on paper, and they're still playing
pretty
at high
functional,
level out of the gate. So this week, they're going to try Antonio Hamilton as their slot corner. That's where Keenan Allen aligns about half the time. He'll see a lot of him when the Chargers are throwing the ball. Allen already had a lot of success against his team last season. 10 targets, 9 catches, 82 yards, and a touchdown, and then a 12-target game with 8 for 71 and a touchdown in his 2 games. So you definitely, I definitely found that interesting. And then again, you have this journeyman Hamilton covering the slot last week, only targeted 4 times, but allowed 4 catches for 52 yards. So I think it's a good matchup for him, and we know that the Chargers are going to have to throw to keep up, and Allen's the top guy here, so I think he does have a bounce back.
I think the rhetoric was a lot. We have a lot less rhetoric from that Chargers offense because they won this past Sunday, but they were close to not winning this past Sunday, and if they had lost, I'm telling you, I said this, I was on radio during the game, and I said if they lose this game, if I were a sports radio host in Los Angeles that had a lot of Chargers coverage, I would be wondering whether it was time for Justin Herbert already, because the offense was tough to watch for a prolonged stretch against a not great defense. They need to bounce back on Sunday. Hey, Daniel, would you mind you want to leave the studio for like 2 minutes? We got something to discuss that I don't really know you want to hear.
Don't think I want to hear about? All right, I think we can do that. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. All right, talk to you later. So the Packers play the Lions on Sunday. Packers wide receivers, as you mentioned, had a day this past week against the Lions. The number 2 wide receiver is still sort of TBD. It might be Marquez Valdez-Scantling. It might be Allen Lazard. It might be both of them are the number 2 wide receiver. But what matters, Mike, is they have a great matchup on Sunday. The Lions are so banged up at cornerback, as we mentioned yesterday on the show. Justin Coleman, IR. Desmond Trufant, banged up. Beyond that, they signed a cornerback, Chris Jones, off of the Cardinals practice squad yesterday. He's previously been with Detroit, which shows that they are looking for depth pieces. Who stands to benefit the most?
Well, I think potentially they could across the board, especially if Desmond Trufant doesn't go in this game. We could see Jeff Okudah, by the way, who's a top 5 pick in the draft. He's expected to play a larger role this week, so we'll see how that goes. Darryl Roberts is going to fill in the slot here for Justin Coleman, as you mentioned. So that's good news for Allen Lazard. He lines up in the slot 63% of the time, caught all of his targets in week 1, had the touchdown, 63 yards. So with Coleman out, who's a good slot corner, and Robertson, that is actually an upgrade for him. As for the other Lions corners, they allowed the 7th most fantasy points to outside receivers, the 5th most overall, and you're going to see Devontae Adams on the outside, who, okay, we're starting him in all format. You know, if you can find a way to use him in DFS, you do, and obviously you start him in season long. But Valdez-Scantling is also on the outside, and again, he had 4 for 96 and a touchdown in week 1, and should see a banged up, again, cornerback room. So definitely upgrading these guys across the board. We saw what happened last week on both sides with the Lions struggling and the Packers playing well. It's all systems go here.
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah, Phil.
Hey, you're good to come back into the studio now.
All right, I'm going to come back into the studio now.
Okay, thanks. Daniel's back. Hey, I was just thinking, like, these guys sound really cool, Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Allen Lazard. I'm not sure I really want to use a roster spot on them yet, Daniel, but I do want to play daily fantasy this weekend on DraftKings, set some line. I'm trying to make some money, but I'm not that good at daily fantasy. I would love to learn more about daily fantasy.
Sure.
And I love on my drive home to Boston on Friday to have great content to listen to.
Sure.
Any thoughts?
Yes, tons of thoughts.
What do you know? Is there a place in which
I'm
I can find a daily fantasy football podcast?
The CSS DFS
What?
podcast field. Clay, Squirrel, and Smizzle breaking down everything you need to know about the daily fantasy lineup that you want on Sundays. Right now, we are doing the show Thursdays directly following this. You can listen to it right here in this same feed. There's no video. It's just an audio podcast right now. But definitely check it out here within the Fantasy Focus football feed every Thursday. Mike Clay, myself, and Al Zeidenfeld. It's really good, Field. You should check it out.
All right, so let's get to. I'm going to. I already downloaded.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to now. The downgrades, Mike, are the players that have less than favorable matchups. And you mentioned already one player you nailed last week. Tyler Boyd had a downgrade last week in that matchup against Chris Harris. So DK Metcalf was a star on Sunday for the Seahawks. He had that beautiful long arcing touchdown catch from Russell Wilson. He now draws the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Stefan Gilmore, who is as good as there is amongst cornerbacks in the NFL. So I was wondering, before the show, hey, would Gilmore go to Tyler Lockett? The Patriots have seemed to in the past, when they have a big-bodied receiver available and a sort of quick and very fast wide receiver available in the slot, use Jonathan Jones on that player, and the big body guy goes to Stefan Gilmore. You anticipate that being the case on Sunday?
You don't need me. You just got it. You just nailed it.
Wow.
Look at that.
I listened to last week's DFS CSS.
That's so good.
CSS DFS, my bad.
So good. I knew you wrote this column, Field. I knew it was you.
I know. Actually,
The jig is up. It is your column. But anyway, I mean, I don't know what else I need to say, but yes, I'll just put some numbers
Well,
on,
how much
on what,
does it
on what you
impact
laid
the
out.
matchup? Yeah.
Definitely. Metcalf, 76% on the perimeter in week 1, Lockett, 26%. And you're right. Last season, we saw that. Now, look, if, let's say, Metcalf was out for whatever reason, then you might see them get a little more creative. Sometimes you would see Gilmore go in the slot, but that's not the case. Metcalf is very much a threat on the perimeter. We know that, so I fully expect him to travel. Obviously, they're of similar size. At least, Gilmore's the bigger corner for the Saints, or for the Patriots, and Jonathan Jones should be on Lockett in the slot. Remember, the Patriots defense lost a lot of pieces in the offseason, certainly. Gilmore wasn't his normal dominant self in week 1, but he was elite last year, and so was this past defense. Fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers, second fewest overall to receivers. And again, that's where Metcalf aligns, is on the outside. By the way, the Patriots defense only allowed 126 yards to Dolphins receivers in week 1. So I know that's not quite Russell Wilson and the Seahawks, but still, they did a nice job.
It's not often that we talk about a Buccaneers cornerback in this column, Mike, or if we do, it's usually, hey, play your wide receiver against the Buccaneers cornerbacks. But the tides have turned.
It has. And in fact, this was the thing I was looking forward to talking about the most, because I think Carlton Davis might be, I don't know if I want to go household name, but maybe football fan household name soon, because he is emerging into one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. And I thought this was interesting because he was drafted a couple years ago, and he's come along slowly, which is often the case for high pedigree corners. Don't be surprised if you see that with like a Jeff Gladney or Okada, who with the Lions. It might take a little while. But he really started to come on late last season. Check out these stat lines. I just want to read off a few of these. This is starting. He came back from injury in week 11 last season. So he faced Michael Thomas. This is what this receiver that I know did against Carlton Davis when he was covering them. 11 routes, 2 targets, no catches against Michael Thomas. Week 12, Julio Jones, 24 routes, 9 catches, 9 targets, 5 catches, 68 yards. Decent. Yep. Then DJ Chark, 19 routes, 1 catch, 17 yards. Kenny Golladay, 21 routes, 2 catches, 18 yards. DeAndre Hopkins, 25 routes, 4 for 19. Week 17, Julio again, 5 for 65 and 34 routes. And then week 1, he shadowed Michael Thomas this season, 19 routes, 4 targets, 2 catches, 9 yards. If you had Michael Thomas in your lineup, he didn't have a great week, and that was because he was locked down. Even before he got beat up, he was locked down. So that's interesting. He didn't start shadowing until late last season, and suddenly he's just shutting down these number 1 receivers. So DJ Moore aligns on the perimeter 70% of the time. It would not surprise me at all if he is shadowed by Carlton Davis in this matchup. Moore did have 2 good games against Tampa last season, but Vernon Hargreaves, who might be the worst starting corner in the NFL, was covering him for most of those plays. So Moore actually ran 25 routes against him last season, 3 catches for 25 yards. So again, I just wanted to take some time to respect what Carlton Davis has done. He's really emerging into a star, and I think he's going to be on Moore a lot this week. I'm downgrading him quite a bit.
Mike Clay putting Carlton Davis on the map. And do you want to ask the question?
I don't need to ask the question. I do want to say it is Jeff Okudah. I need you to put some respect on Jeff Okudah's name, Mike Clay, all right?
What team's he on? I don't really follow that team. So I don't.
All right. Wow. I'm just saying.
Do you need to be separated, the two of you?
I can't actually say anything because the Lions obviously fell apart. It was unfortunate, but so did the Eagles. So I can't.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. All right. We're same team.
I can't.
Yeah,
Right.
Same team.
Smart lineup decisions are informed by IBM Watson, and Curtis Samuel's 26.9% boom percentage ranks 3rd amongst all wide receivers this week. With DJ Moore getting the downgrade, does that mean that Samuel gets the upgrade for you, Mike?
Well, here's the thing. It's not just Carlton Davis in that secondary, right? Because he's one of many young corners. So Sean Murphy-Bunting looked pretty good in week 1 as well. So it is a tougher matchup for him than you might have expected against Tampa Bay. However, Samuel was targeted on almost 30% of his pass routes in week 1. So they spread it around pretty well with Moore and Robbie Anderson had obviously a big game and Curtis Samuel. So absolutely, there's definitely some boom potential here for Samuel. But again, the Bucs defense is they're getting better.
Well, I hope it's not a thing, but Christian McCaffrey had just 4 targets in week 1, and Ian Thomas had just 2 catches for 16 yards. So if the targets get funneled to those wide receivers, maybe they could carry relevance in 3 of them. I would encourage those who maybe didn't see it yesterday on social media to go check out the clip of Robbie Anderson, who had a great week 1 for the Panthers, and his introduction into Sir Purr, the Panthers mascot. Have you guys seen this?
I did not.
It's very funny.
It was really funny.
It's one of those things that's like, it's not quite funny and great enough to go viral. Like if you didn't see it, you've been sleeping under a rock. or living under a rock, but it's one of those things that you will appreciate when you have the chance to go back and watch it right now. Daniel, do we have time for social questions, or must we get right into? Oh, we do, because there's no trivia today.
Yeah, we got a couple of social questions here. I'm just going to go rapid fire with these. All right, we got a bunch of questions from chat, so it's just going to be real quick here.
Do it to it.
R. Stu says, having trouble with the flex position, OBJ or Rojo this week?
Wow, good
PPR.
question. I go with OBJ. I'm assuming it's PPR.
Interesting. I'm going to go Rojo. It's close, but I'm going to go with the running back. More touches.
Good matchup.
Good matchup against Carolina, too. I like that a lot.
With that as a conversation, Leonard Fournette, we've talked about how maybe he has rest of season value. Is he a trade target for you guys, or are you waiting to see something more before you try to figure out if you're going to try to propose a trade to another manager in your league?
I mean, he's probably sitting on someone's bench. And if you could just move along one of your own bench pieces for Leonard Fournette, I would do it. I'm not sure that I'm paying any premium whatsoever.
Sure.
Yeah, no premium. But again, he is one of the few guys that could eventually emerge into feature back duties in a very good offense. So definitely.
Okay. This question comes from E. Wilden W. Anthony Miller, Alan Lazard, and Mark Ingram. Looking for a flex position. Anthony Miller, Alan Lazard, or Mark Ingram?
I'm highest amongst all rankers on Mark Ingram this week. I'm going to go with Mark Ingram. I think he bounces back. I think they win, believe it or not. I think he bounces back, and the usage is – I think last week was bad game script for him in the sense they were up by so much that it was like, you know what? J.K. Dobbins, score a couple touchdowns. Have at it.
Yeah, Dobbins actually played more snaps in that game. So I hear you for sure. I was actually very low on Mark Ingram coming into the season.
Bragger.
And still – well, we'll see. That I might be wrong, but still, I have Ingram highest this week here. And by the way, I also like the Lazard matchup, but I still think you go with the running back here. You know, he could get upward of 15 touches. I'm going Ingram.
Okay. Rob S. wants to know on the other side of that, Antonio Gibson or J.K. Dobbins this week?
I think it's got to be Gibson, don't you? I mean, J.K. Dobbins, 7 carries, 22 yards, 2 touchdowns this past week, but I thought some of that was, well, you know what, though? Now I'm talking myself out of this one. I just think the passing game usage for Gibson, and I don't know exactly how many targets he had last week, but the idea of the passing game for Antonio Gibson is a more certain thing versus J.K. Dobbins, who still feels like a change of pace to me.
Yeah, I feel like I have to say check my rankings because I honestly can't even remember who I put it. Sometimes those guys
it's
are
really
so close.
Right?
It is very close.
It's a great example of a flex question, though.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think that Gibson's probably going to play more and more and more. I mean, we just didn't see any efficiency out of J.D. McKissick's efficiency was unbelievably bad. I mean, he had like 12 touches for 1 yard or so. I think he had -1 scrimmage yard in that game, and Peyton Barber didn't run it too well.
17 for 39.
Yeah,
for
they're going to be
with
involved
2 touchdowns.
Yeah, but they would be crazy not to just continue to ramp up Gibson. So I would lean slightly that direction, I think.
Okay, David Reynolds wants to know if CeeDee Lamb gets more targets and looks this week with Blake Jarwin out, where is it that we're ranking him in fantasy for week 2?
Does he feel like cusp of top 30 wide receivers?
Definitely.
That's where I would say.
I mean,
cusp.
last season, Dallas had 3 top 31 receivers with Randall Cobb in there when all 3 played. Just the weeks they all 3 played. So absolutely, they're going to run 3 wide sets the whole season. Lamb's always going to be on the field, and high pedigree, high talent. There's no question. I think he's already starting to creep into that top 35 or so conversation.
Okay. All right, we got one more here, and the question comes from Chuck. Wants to know Kareem Hunt or Miles Sanders. If Miles Sanders starts, you've got to roll with Miles Sanders, right?
Yeah,
you got to play Miles Sanders if he plays. Now, understanding you have to make that decision tonight because the game that Kareem Hunt's playing in is at 8:20 Eastern time. I would still, based off the information we have, I would be planning on Miles Sanders being in your lineup, and I would prefer him to Kareem Hunt.
But if you have Kareem Hunt in an open flex position, I wonder how great your flex is that you're not starting Kareem Hunt.
You must have a very good roster.
Really good roster.
1-0 with like 150 points under your belt, right?
Yeah. Yep. All right, guys, that's going to do it for social questions today. But another quick reminder for those of you that did not know, we are doing a live remote show. We are no longer going out this year. We're going to do a live virtual event Tuesday, September 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern. We would love for you guys to join us. It's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to do nothing but question and answers from you, the viewers, hanging out with us. Registration is free, but space is limited. So go to bit.ly/fantasyfocusfootball, all lowercase, bit.ly/fantasyfocusfootball to sign up. Come hang out with us next Tuesday. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm telling you.
In the meantime, go check out Mike's column on ESPN Plus, wide receiver cornerback matchups. Love, hate has been posted from our friend Matthew Berry.
Yep.
Stephania Bell is going to be churning out content because that's what Stephania does. I'm going to try to find a way to do the exact same thing. I just don't have nearly as much confidence in myself.
New episode of The Fantasy Show drops later tonight as well.
I mean, wow, we are rolling right now.
Wow.
Seriously.
We are just cooking with grease right now. And a reminder that Fantasy Football Now, Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We're back on the Deuce this week. ESPN2, we had the F1 race this past week, so we appreciate those that were patient, mostly on ESPN News. We eventually found our way to ESPN2. This week, there are no such concerns. Mike Clay NFL on Twitter, Stephania_ESPN, Daniel Dopp. I'm at Field Yates. We are back on Friday. We'll talk to you then. Peace out.
It's no secret, not a mystery. The one that we depend on for all our podcast needs. Graduate, Full Sail U, Alliance fan through and through. With the hippest beard, I'm telling you.